everyone, and welcome to the PSEO Coalition's virtual showcase for 2026. We're so glad you're here. I am Gina Johnson. I serve as director of the PSEO Coalition, and tell you just briefly what the heck is the PSEO Coalition and why are we all here together. For those of you who this is your first time potentially on a PSEO Coalition virtual event. So PSEO stands for the Postsecondary Employment Outcomes. It is a partnership between the United States Census and different entities like state agencies of higher education, state systems of higher education, or even individual institutions that share some data, some outcomes completions data with the US Census, and the US Census team, the LEHD team there, matches those data with outcomes, employment outcomes of folks all across the United States. And so we at this point have more than 39 states participating, meaning there's at least one institution participating from more than 39 states. And we say more than 39 because we want to acknowledge, of course, Washington, D.C., which participates, and an entity, an institution called Western Governors University, which is an online institution and so crosses many states. And folks participate and attend Western Governors University from across the country. We have more than 1,000 institutions at this point represented in the data set. It is completely voluntary to participate. And you may be on here because you're interested, because your institution or your institutions represented in your state or your system do participate in the PSEO Coalition, or you might be on here because you're interested in having your institution or set of institutions participate. So we welcome everyone. We're very excited to share some information with you today. And so what we're specifically highlighting today is our research grants. So for the last 2 years, with generous funding from Strata Education Foundation, we have been able to award a set of research grants through a competitive process. Members of the research committee of the PSEO Coalition have served as reviewers, and we've had many, many interested folks here in 2026 in particular. And we have been able to fund 6 research projects. And we are actually going to be featuring 7 research projects today because 6 were funded through our research grants, and I'll show you the agenda here at the outline. And 1 was funded through a different source. 2 of our partners, Dr. Jason Simon and Dr. Christopher Pena, who already have worked with the PSEO Coalition for a while now, also agreed to do a research project of their own. So we're very excited to feature all 7 of these projects. So the way we're going to run this today is after this welcome, which I'm concluding at this point in time, we are going to invite the set of presentations that focused on development of dashboards to present, and that'll include the Research Institute at Dallas College, University of Illinois System, and the New Jersey Office of the Secretary of Higher Education. Each of them will have about 10 minutes to present. And then we will have a Q&A session at the end for just those 3 presentations. And so that you don't have to memorize your question and not be able to ask it right away, please use the chat function. We're pretty informal at the PSEO Coalition. This is not a webinar style where we have a Q&A separate from a chat. You can just use the chat function. We do ask that you stay muted at this point in time. If during the Q&A session, it's easier for us to raise up your question and then ask you to add to it in case there's something that we want you to clarify, we will do so. But otherwise, please do stay muted out of respect for our presenters. But at the end of that session, again, we'll have Q&A. Type them in the chat as you think of them. There sometimes are multiple authors from each of these projects that are on this presentation. And so maybe if it's a quick question, one of the others can answer. Otherwise, during that Q&A, we will raise up those questions and ask them verbally. Right before the hour, we will take, excuse me, a 5 to 10 minute break. And then on the hour, we'll come back. We'll leave the Zoom open. We'll just all go mute and off video. And then we will come back on the hour to hear the 4 more presentations that focused more on a research report. Some of them had some dashboarding as well, but we will allow them to present. And then again, we will have a bit of Q&A at the end. So with that, there's going to be a couple of links placed in the chat, so do watch that. We have information, including dashboard links and reports published from all of these projects in our resource library at pseocoalition.org. And we're very excited I will be serving sort of as the MC here, and I'll be breaking in and introducing each of the presenters in turn. We will ask them, there will just be some switching over of sharing screens so that way they can drive themselves. So I am going to stop sharing my screen and invite our colleagues from the Research Institute at Dallas College to share their screen. And then we'll kick it off, and they'll start with introductions of themselves, of their team, and then go ahead with their presentation. So thank you so much for joining us, and thanks so much, Navi and Dylan.
Thank you so much, Gina. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the PSEO Coalition Showcase. Our project's entitled Boom or Bust, Exploring Post-Secondary Programs with Uneven Earnings. And my name is Navi Dhaliwal, and I was joined in this work by my Dallas College colleagues, Dylan Liu and McKenna Griffin, and the latter of whom is co-presenting with me today. I just wanted to say thank you before we begin to the PSEO Coalition for the grant and also the technical guidance that made it possible for us to conduct this work. As researchers embedded within a large urban community college, we see often in our day-to-day how economic opportunity motivates so many of our students to first enroll with us, and we were really excited by the chance to use PSEO data to better understand their post-college outcomes. Something we think about often at our college is how we can really fold economic outcomes data into institutional processes like program review and labor market alignment. And the PSEO has really emerged for us as a leading source in those conversations, but we were really interested in more ways to fully utilize the data it offered. And so with the PSEO, including not just median earnings, but 25th and 75th percentile earnings as well, this sparked an idea. What if we were to use those data points, especially that bottom 25% of earners, to characterize program outcomes instead of just using the median? So what would it mean for us to hold ourselves to a higher standard where we're saying we're achieving desired outcomes, not just for the typical student, but even for the lowest earning graduates of a program? And so that's the inspiration behind this project. And we've produced both a report and a data dashboard that we'll share today to further explore this idea. In our report, we zoom in from a national perspective to the state and institutional levels. We start with broad descriptive trends at the national level. Then we look at two-digit fields of study and conduct a state-level policy analysis. And finally, we look at the most granular level, four-digit fields of study, as kind of a case study of what program review could look like at Dallas College. We use the percentile earnings data to create three stylized metrics, all based on or starting from that point of 25th percentile earnings. So those earnings of the lower quartile of graduates. We labeled 25th percentile earnings itself as a program's floor. So you can think of this as the lower tail outcome, and we wanted to know which programs did best by their lowest earners according to that floor. From there, we also constructed a metric of dispersion, basically the interquartile range between those highest earners that we can measure, the 75th percentile, and the 25th percentile earners 1 year after credential completion. So you can imagine programs that had a high dispersion metric could have very inequitable outcomes, with some students sort of experiencing that boom, and others a bust in our title. We really wanted to understand which programs exhibited highly polarized outcomes. And finally, we also wanted to look at growth among the lowest earning students. That's a population that can change from year 1 to 5. The composition can change. But our idea here was to focus on how quickly lowest earning students were rising in terms of their economic prospects. So I'll share just a quick snapshot of our findings at each level of analysis before turning it over to McKenna, who will share more findings from the dashboard we created. And we definitely encourage you to check out our full report and the dashboard itself for more. But first, one of the most consistent findings nationwide and in nearly every subsample that we looked at was that growth rarely closed initial dispersion gaps. And this was true even within fields of study. So in other words, that bottom quartile of graduates was seldom catching up to where the median graduate started in their very first year. Second, and kind of a cross-cutting finding within Texas, was that there were real teeth to whether the bottom quartile was used versus the median. So we considered how the state self-sufficient wage threshold, if applied to associate degree programs, would change pass rates. And we found, real differences in the amount of programs that pass at the median versus the 25th percentile. And finally, at Dallas College, where we were looking at program mix in greater detail, we often found pretty large disparities and differences even within fields of study, especially when there were programs tied to licensure where there were more standardized workforce pathways. So I hope this gives you just a taste of what's in our full report, and now I'll turn things over to McKenna for a snapshot of our dashboard.
Thanks, Navi. And hi, everyone. My name is McKenna, and my role in this project was to take the metrics that Navi described and put them into an interactive dashboard that we have housed on Tableau Public. The dashboard follows the same structure as the report, where we're able to make 3 points of comparison. So first, we can compare state-level data in a national context. Then we can compare institution level data in a state context. And finally, we can compare program level data within an institution. We're going to share 3 findings from our dashboard today. The first is that we were able to directly compare floor and growth outcomes to see kind of an objectively positive outcome for Dallas College students. So we compared these 2 measures directly because as lower earnings increases, students are experiencing more positive outcomes. And as growth increases, students are also experiencing more positive outcomes. And here we see that Dallas College has a high floor for associate degree completers in any instructional program at about $36,000 per year, and high growth at about $16,000 over 5 years. And this is in comparison to all colleges offering associate degrees in Texas that are available in the PSEO. Our next finding, Navi just described really well, but here's a good visual for you. So our dispersion metric really has to be interpreted with some context. So a wide dispersion value can mean a positive or negative outcome, kind of depending on the floor and growth values that we're seeing for a particular institution or program. And here we see that phenomenon where growth, or the difference in 25th percentile earnings from year 1 to year 5, is not exceeding the dispersion metric or the difference in 75th and 25th percentile earnings. It's usually not even exceeding the difference between 25th percentile and 50th percentile earnings in that first year. And this is something we saw across all states, most institutions, and most programs of study. Finally, we'll talk a little bit about program of study. So if you remember, we saw that Dallas College was performing well against peer institutions in both floor and growth metrics. But when we dive into that data point and compare outcomes by different program of study at the associate degree level, we see a really wide range of outcomes. So our floor measures at Dallas College range from $23,000 to $58,000 per year, depending on program of study. And growth outcomes range from $5,000 to $16,000 over 5 years. These program level outcomes were of most interest to our internal stakeholders. They were really happy and receptive to see this report and really excited about the opportunity that this data set provides for Dallas College. They've asked to use our outcomes in processes for program review, particularly for looking at pre and post changes to curriculum over time. They're also hoping to use our floor outcomes in conversations with labor market partners as a way to kind of start those negotiations and ensure that students are earning as much as they possibly can. They've also asked us to use this data with a reduced set of peer institutions, the very large community colleges in Texas, as a way to benchmark these metrics for our KPIs. So with that, I'd like to say thank you all for your time. Here's a link to our website that can get access to our PSEO report, our dashboard, some of our other work, and there's also a place to sign up for a monthly newsletter. So I'll go ahead and turn things over to Gina to pass us on to the next presentation. Thanks.
Thank you all so much. That's amazing. And feel free to, in case anyone missed that QR code, please feel free to place if there's a link, place that link in the chat so folks can access that, because I know we didn't give you much time to leave your slides up. So thank you so much. I also want to just highlight and say thanks so much as well for letting us know right there at the end how folks are really using this. That was one of the highlights that we had from our research applications this year, as we asked folks to really think about how these data, these projects could be actionable. So I really appreciate you all at Dallas College Research Institute at Dallas College for highlighting that for us. We're going to turn it over at this point to the University of Illinois system. So please go ahead and share your screen, and we're excited to hear from you.
All right. Well, thank you for the intro. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are in the country today. We're going to be talking to you today from the University of Illinois System. My name is Chris Lehman, Director of Planning and Analysis, and I'm going to be joined with Cheyenne Galentine, who's going to talk about this dashboard, just going to show that. And it's going to reveal some interesting things about our graduates' earnings and economic mobility using PSEO data. Next slide. So just briefly to give you some context, University of Illinois System is the state's largest system of higher education, over 100,000 students. Our three institutions, we have Urbana-Champaign, which is now our number 12 ranked public university in the country. In Chicago, we have an R1 with a hospital, and in Springfield, we have our regional in the state capital. We joined the PSEO in 2024 alongside 76 other partner institutions in the state. Have a little data visualization here to keep with the theme. Breaking that down, 70% of all our Illinois institutions are in the data set, 100% at the University of Illinois System, 92 among four-year publics, 28 among the four-year privates, and 100% coverage of our two-year publics. We did a presentation on PSEO at the 2024 AIR Forum, even though we didn't even have the data yet. We're so excited about it. And now we're really grateful that we have the opportunity via this grant to present these dashboards. So Cheyenne, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Chris. So as you mentioned, we were very excited to have the opportunity to use this grant to finally leverage the outcomes data, especially in the context of the current higher education landscape and in institutional research, where there's this growing demand for transparency around how graduates fare after they leave the institution, for return on investment with degree programs, and to show that college is quote unquote worth it. So we faced a challenge as we started diving into the data and trying to figure out what kind of questions we would want to answer. PSEO data and other outcomes data are valuable and rich, but they're also complex and can be difficult to interpret. So rather than trying to focus on answering a specific research question, we instead decided to try to build a dashboard that would make it easier for users of all various familiarity with the data to understand the long-term earnings outcomes of our graduates, and to make it easier for them to compare these outcomes across degree programs, peer institutions, and earnings percentiles. So we followed some specific design strategies while we were building the dashboard. The first of these was we wanted to make comparisons more intuitive. So we did this by developing a 10-year earnings growth rate, which is just the percent change in earnings from year 1 to year 10 post-graduation. And this was meant to serve as a proxy for economic mobility because it gives us a simple way to describe how much the earnings of our graduates have changed over time. There's a lot of benefits to using this kind of measure. It's standardized across groups, and it focuses on the earnings trajectory rather than just salary at a discrete point in time. And it also is more accessible for different types of users for the dashboard. So this is to highlight sort of the benefit of using that growth rate. So on the left here, we have 3 different earnings trajectories plotted over time. And to interpret the change in earnings, we are asking users to find the difference in earnings for 3 different lines on 3 different years, versus showing these trajectories as simple growth rates is a way to make it much easier to compare these more quickly. So our goal wasn't to erase the underlying data of the earnings level, but just to give a simple comparison metric to help ease interpretation of the data. Our second design strategy was to reduce the complexity of the data by focusing on specific aspects that we include in the dashboard. So the first thing we did is, before we even designed a visualization, we came up with some questions that we thought users might want to answer using the PSEO data. And then we developed a visualization or a view based on each of these questions. Then we adopted a consistent layout for each view. So on the left, we had very clearly labeled interactive filters, a population summary that shows how many graduates are actually represented out of the entire cohort. And then on the right, we always had the main visualization with the summary statement. And then finally, we focused the population. So instead of including all years of the graduate cohort, we just included the most recent bachelor's degree recipients who had 10-year earnings data available, so 2010 to 2012. Our third design strategy is, we felt it was really important to provide as much context as possible to help guide interpretation. So basically explaining what the data is, what it can do, but also, more importantly, what it can't do. So we did this by creating a data dictionary. This included terms specific to U of I system, like what UIUC stands for, as well as PSEO specific terms like what a graduate cohort entails. We also clearly communicated the limitations of the data in an overview on our overview landing page, and then also in specific interactive elements in each dashboard view. And then also, to help guide interpretation, we included summary statements and descriptive statistics at the top of each dashboard view. So to highlight these examples, this is one of our peer comparison views. And you can see here we have linked the table of contents and the data dictionary in case a user has a question about a term that they're interacting with. We also, this is an example of an interactive limitation of the data. So we included peer institutions, some of which did not have PSEO data. So we made it clear which institutions were partner institutions with PSEO and which weren't. And then we also included something like a summary statement that helps sort of set the scene for the data and helps users interpret the data as a whole before they start to dive into the more detailed aspects using those filters. So just to cover some brief takeaways in our journey in building this dashboard. The first is that earnings level and growth tell very different stories. So here I have our 10-year earnings by degree program for the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, or UIUC. And you can see that Computer and Information Sciences has the highest 10-year earnings of all the degree programs. However, if we look at 10-year growth rate for UIUC, we can see that biology has the highest 10-year growth rate, and Computer and Information Sciences is sort of in the bottom half there. So these two metrics are telling very different stories about these degree programs. And so we felt that it was important to view these metrics as complementary aspects of a more complete story of long-term graduate outcomes. So here we created this quadrant that plots 10-year growth rate on the y-axis and average earnings on the x-axis. So you can see the long-term outcomes for degree programs with those combined metrics. Our second takeaway is that where graduates start matters, but so does where they end up. So in this view, we are looking at 1-year post-graduation earnings for our smaller rural serving institution, the University of Illinois Springfield. And I want to draw your attention to the social sciences degree program, which is second to last in 1-year earnings for UIS. However, looking at 10-year earnings and 10-year growth rate, we can see social sciences actually has the largest 10-year growth rate for all the degree programs at UIS, and is in the top half for 10-year earnings of all the degree programs. So looking at earnings potential and earnings trajectory also helps dispel some common biases or myths that might be associated with degree programs that have lower initial starting salaries. And I'm biased with this one because I am a social sciences bachelor's degree recipient. So this was a good hero story for me personally. And then our final takeaway is that while the median might be the headline for this story, it doesn't show the details. And it's important to look at groups of graduates beyond just the average experience. So the great benefit of PSEO is you guys provide the 25th, 50th, and 70th percentile earnings to show different groups of graduates and their outcomes. So here I have our University of Illinois Chicago biology graduates for the 50th percentile, so the median. And we can see that they have experienced greater combined 10-year growth and 10-year earnings in comparison to their peer institutions. And in a more detailed peer comparison view, we can see that this outcome is not just driven by the middle and higher end of the distribution, but that graduates in the 25th percentile from UIC's biology program are earning the second highest among all peer institutions and also experience the highest 10-year growth rate among all peer institutions. So it was really important that we were able to show experiences of all different kinds of graduates rather than just the average. So in terms of future directions, we've had a lot of interest about this data on campus. We actually fulfilled a data request earlier in the summer from President Colleen. He wanted some of this PSEO data to present to the Board of Trustees. So this is definitely of interest among executive leadership and all over campus. So we want to continue trying to develop visualizations and tools that meet various needs. One point of interest was an internal dashboard that could be used for academic program review, since this one is publicly available and more large scale. And then we also want to continue to promote this project on campus by presenting it at conferences and also hosting dashboard technical workshops so that we can help users use the dashboard to best fit their needs. So specifically, Chris and I are presenting on this project at the Illinois Association for Institutional Research Conference and the University of Illinois Data Summit. So thank you sincerely for the opportunity to work on this grant and for listening to our presentation. I included a link to the dashboard, which I can also drop in the chat, as well as our emails if you have additional questions or just want to connect about your work on PSEO. So thank you so much.
Thanks so mush, Chris and Cheyenne. That's amazing. And you reminded me to let everyone know that at the end of all of this, we will actually compile everyone's slides. And when we place the recording of this showcase on our website, we will also include the master slide deck. So in case there are pieces that you didn't catch or email addresses or whatever that is, again, to our speakers, feel free to put anything you want to in the chat that's helpful. And then also for our attendees, just know that you will have access to all of this. It usually takes us a couple days just to get it up on the website because we have to check the recording and all of those pieces, but it will be up on our website. So thank you so much. All right. Our third presentation in this first half, and thank you to those of you who are active in the chat. We're watching those and we will be raising up some questions, so feel free to keep adding those in there. We are going to turn it over now to the New Jersey office of the Secretary of Higher Education, and our speakers will introduce themselves, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Gina, and thank you everyone from the PSEO Coalition. Appreciate being here today with you all. No, NJ Oshie is a mouthful. My name is Josefina Ewens. I'm a policy analyst here at the agency, joined today by my colleague Mark Walzer from the Data and Research team, and we're happy to be here to present our project, Understanding Employment Outcomes for New Jersey Students. So just want to share that this was a collaborative, 6-person effort to put this project together, both the dashboards and our complementary white paper with it as well, focused on making data-informed policy decisions. Go back more. I noticed that someone said that my audio was bad. Just want to make sure you could still hear me.
We can hear you, but it's a little soft. I don't know if you can get closer to your microphone potentially.
Okay, perfect. Better or no? Sorry. So I'm going to continue in hopes that it's better, and if not, I can see the chat, so just let me know.
Sounds
For the
better.
purpose of okay, perfect. As new members of the PSEO Coalition, we wanted to showcase how this data can combine with our internal state longitudinal systems, being the New Jersey statewide data system, or NJSDS, just to make sure that we're understanding to our stakeholders how they can utilize this data for themselves and truly create discussions on campus, as many as of our colleagues here today talked about on their campuses and institutions, of how stakeholders on the ground are able to use this data outside of just state agencies, data nerds like ourselves, as well as institutional leaders. So often this work sits on a shelf somewhere, want to make sure that it's being utilized on the ground as it should be. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Mark.
Thank you, Josefina. So the grant purposes in the last slide, it guided how we defined our research questions, so I'll go over those now. So to use national PSEO data as benchmarks for our state outcomes, we first had to understand the PSEO data. So that's why our first research question asks, what are the average quartile earnings for the different populations of graduates in the PSEO sample for both 1 and 5 years post-graduation? We also wanted to compare our current data from the New Jersey statewide data system with the PSEO data to anticipate our outcome benchmarks and policy goals. To make these comparisons, we used populations defined by Carnegie Foundation variables and institutional variables. And our second research question is, how do individual New Jersey institutions' graduate employment data compare to the summary statistics of their Carnegie and sector peers? And finally, we wanted to make comparisons also using employment flow. So our third research question was, are there observable differences between the proportions of graduates who remain in the same state in which they earn their degrees among other PSEO member states, and those same proportions for New Jersey colleges and universities? So before getting into the results, I wanted to review some of the methodology notes that we adopted when comparing the PSEO and NJSDS data. So first of all, the graduate cohorts that we used. Unfortunately, the PSEO and NJSDS sources do not exactly overlap in terms of defining groups of graduate cohorts. But we generally used the PSEO cohorts that overlapped with the NJSDS range of 2014 to 2019. We also used the median values of all earnings data. So for example, for the 25th percentile 1 year out earnings for bachelor's degree recipients, we calculated all of those percentile earnings at the institutional level, combined all of those, and then used the median value as the reported overall 25th percentile earnings for those graduates. And finally, we also adjusted all earnings by cost of living using the state in which the reporting institutions were located to make those adjustments to the earnings data. So with all that being said, to answer our first research question, we created dashboards, again, on Tableau Public, comparing the earnings quartiles for associates and bachelor's degree holders 1 and 5 years out after graduation. We found that for all institution types, degree levels, and graduate cohorts, the quartile earnings increased over time, but these trends did vary by degree program. So using 2-digit zip codes, we found overall that graduates from business, health professions, and STEM-related academic programs generally reported higher quartile earnings. To better understand these differences, we joined Carnegie Foundation variables to the institutions included in the PSEO datasets. So this chart here from our dashboard actually shows bachelor's degree recipients from private nonprofit institutions, and also includes the new student access and earnings classification, which is a Carnegie Foundation variable. Now you can see that this blue bar here in the center shows the median 50th percentile earnings 1 year after graduation, specifically for graduates from high access, high earnings institutions as classified under SAEC. You can see that the median earnings here actually goes above this red bar right here, which shows the overall 1 year out median earnings for all graduates of the same degree level and institutional control. So basically, this chart is showing that graduates from high access, high earnings institutions report a higher median earnings compared with their peers who are also earning bachelor's degrees from private nonprofit institutions. So besides this trend, we also found that graduates from low access and high earnings institutions also generally reported higher earnings. The same is true for graduates from institutions classified as high research activity and institutions classified as having a special focus in STEM and health professions related fields. So for our second research question, we're comparing PSEO and NJSDS data. Because the NJSDS data actually shows trends by combinations of zip codes, we grouped the PSEO data together by 2-digit zip code to match the same groups. You can see here, this is the 1 year out median earnings for bachelor's degree recipients from public institutions. You can see that the trend here, even after the cost of living adjustment, is very similar from both data sources. Again, we see graduates from business, especially health professions, and also STEM fields tend to report higher 1 year out median earnings compared with other degree programs. And in addition, the same patterns across the Carnegie Foundation variables in the PSEO data were also apparent in the NJSDS data. So a good similarity there. So for our third research question, which asks, are there observable differences between the proportions of graduates who work in the same state they earn their degree, comparing the PSEO member states and New Jersey? We created a separate dashboard to answer that question. And you can see this chart here shows specifically for associate's degree recipients 1 year out after graduation. New Jersey actually ranks third for the proportion of these graduates who work in the same state where they attended college. For bachelor's degrees, the 1 year out employment flow trend is similar. New Jersey ranks sixth. And now that we are joining PSEO and able to look at trends for graduates who work out of state, we're definitely looking forward to making comparisons on that side of the equation as well. So I will turn things back to Josefina to summarize these results and put them in context.
Thanks, Mark. So as a state agency, it is our job to convene with the institutions and make sure that they're aware of all of the resources that we have available to them. So it is really important as we think about working with our faculty staff, our students, and our industry partners and thinking about workforce development, how they're able to utilize this data, whether it be tracking educational pathways, using it and leverage in educational program selection and skill development, especially for students when they're thinking about what am I supposed to do with this degree. And lastly, giving space for the institutions to think about program and institutional level assessment so that they're aligning with workforce needs. So, and finally, and how we plan on using this data, as I mentioned in terms of convening, is to bring these partners together, especially other state agencies that are doing similar work so that it's nothing is being duplicative and we can actually see results on our institutional campuses and for the students themselves for elevation within their own life statuses, and conduct more analysis as more data is updated to the PSEO and comparative to that of our NJSDS data, and continuously share knowledge and practices with our partners. If there's any questions, we're excited to answer them with the cheers in the background. Feel free to contact the research team with the email on the screen. Thank you.
That was pretty incredible timing. I love that. There's trumpets and all kinds of music as you were wrapping up. That was lovely. That's beautiful. I have been watching the chat. There was one question, and it sounds like I think one of the speakers answered it right in the chat. So I will ask in a moment if they wanted to add something to that. But while folks are generating some other questions, if there are some other questions that folks have. I would love to ask a question of each of the presentation teams, and so feel free, more than one of you can feel free to answer as well. If you don't mind, just for logistical purposes, I think it would be easy to go in the order that you spoke. But I would love to hear from each of the teams any tips that you have for folks who are digging into these data and maybe wanting to create a dashboard with their own PSEO data. So whether that's a set of institutions or one institution's data. If I could put the Research Institute at Dallas College on the spot, since you went first, if you wouldn't mind answering first, just curious about tips that you all have for folks who are digging into these data maybe for the first time.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I feel like one of the things that we tended to gravitate toward in our research were opportunities to use the more novel elements of the PSEO data. So I want to say, although we looked at the bottom quartile earnings and kind of made that our focus, I think if you're diving in for the first time, there's a lot of value in just understanding median earnings by field of study in the different programs and fields that you offer at your institution or in your context. And there's a lot of statistical rationale behind doing that too. I think something to consider maybe from the institutional lens is if you have a really good sense of how your programs map to those fields, you may get kind of differential amounts of information back from the tool. So that's something to think about. Like for us, we had a lot of different programs that fit within the allied health kind of broader field. And so there's this almost interpretive layer that you can bring with your context. I think the other thing that is kind of underutilized and something really worth checking out, I think was showcased well in the last presentation, is the geographic flows of graduates. And so this has been a tool that we've used just to get context on the location of our graduates after Dallas College. McKenna, do you want to add to that at all?
That was great. Maybe if I were to add anything, I would just say that we spent a lot of time with the resources that the PSEO already offers. We spent a lot of time in your dashboard that you have. And that was a great starting point. We didn't want to like replicate any of the work that had already been done. We really wanted to kind of expand upon that. So I think that's a great place to start for anyone who's interested in looking at the data. There's a ton of resources that use the PSEO, starting there and kind of seeing what questions arise naturally for your institution from that point.
I love that. Thank you for highlighting that. Our colleagues at the US Census spend obviously tons of time and resources on the PSEO Explorer tool. And I know I've spent hours clicking around in there and seeing what I can learn. And I love how that tool really, it answers some questions and it also generates more questions and gets me thinking about how I want to know more things. So thanks for highlighting that as well. How about the folks from University of Illinois System? Any tips that you have for anyone who's thinking about creating a dashboard or answering questions using PSEO data?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for Chris and I, this was very relevant because we're both, data people. And so we were really excited to just have access and dig in. And honestly, it took a long time for us to decide on the specific aspects that we did decide to focus on, just because we would get so excited. Oh, look here, we have the second highest earnings in all of, the data set for this degree program, but it's kind of like, how do you make that useful? So I think and took some inspiration from the Coalition RCOP group as well. Just thinking about what kind of questions our stakeholders and we and just higher ed in general already has about outcomes data and how we can sort of mold this into something that could help get at that. I think that what really helped us actually start to make progress toward a visualization was sort of taking a step back and not, just sort of diving into the data ball pit, if you will. And yeah, just really making it simple. Obviously, we will do some more complex and more inclusive visualizations. Like I mentioned, we only included 2-digit level SIPs and just bachelor's degree. Obviously, we want to work with the 4-digit zip codes and graduates and do all the things. But this was just sort of a pilot test of like, can we make something out of this data? Because it truly is just sort of endless what you can do with it. So, Chris, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was going to add too, and that was great, Cheyenne, that I'd say don't be afraid to present on this data, kind of like we are today, even though it can be a little scary. I just think the more you dive in, and even, you might be talking to your leaders and you might not have all the context and you might not have all the details, but it's, the more you get it out there. And actually it's so great, even this presentation, we presented and we have a couple comments that there were some things we hadn't thought about or researched to look up, and that's wonderful. I mean, we just want to kind of bulletproof these numbers as much as we can so that we can go to our leadership and say, "Hey, we're pretty confident that this is something you could highlight in a board meeting, or this is something that could be a brag point." And so, yeah, I think the more you play with it, and even the more you just talk to people about it. I mean, you could be presenting it to your internal audience, but even to like a regional group or something, don't be afraid to download the data, play with it, especially the earnings side. The flows get a little more complicated. That data set is kind of a monster in terms of the size. But just starting with earnings, I think is a good, like get your feet wet. And sorry, I'm going to say it again, the data ball pit thing, that was great. Cheyenne, that's a wonderful way to put it. So yeah, that's about it.
I think we're going to see you both cited there. In addition to the actual, analysis that you did, they're going to cite you with the data ball pit quotation. I love that. All right. Finally, our friends from New Jersey, anything you all would share, tips that you realize? I think yours was so unique because you're not getting your PSEO data until later this month, which yay to that you are getting your data. August 27th, we're all waiting. But you took a different route, and curious what you found poking around in kind of other people's PSEO data to prep for getting your own later this month.
Well, I can say just from sending up the dashboards that you all make it very easy to access all the information we need, all of the guides to creating different syntax and programs. It's all very intuitive, very easy to access data at whatever level you want, which made it in turn easy for us to go in and use R or your stats software of choice to join the PSEO earnings and flow data with third-party institutional information, in our case, the Carnegie Foundation variables. So, taking the metaphor a bit further, I think you can, if you want, expand it from a data ball pit into an entire data ocean. So I think that really helps you envision the PSEO data in all these different ways, helps you make comparisons outside of what you automatically see in the PSEO Explorer screen. And I think, because you made it so intuitive, that's definitely very helpful.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. This is perfect timing, by the way, because we did say that we wanted to give everyone a chance to stretch, fill their water bottle, let the dog out if you need, like me, sometimes to do that, on a break if the dog is waiting outside of your office. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just in case folks join us in the interim, because I'm just going to have an intermission slide up. For all of you, we would love to have you stay. Again, we're going to have 4 more excellent presentations on the hour. So I'm going to go ahead, give you all, of course, permission to go off video, to go silent. I think you're already muted anyways. And we will be back on the hour. with the first of our second half of presentations. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us again after this brief intermission. We're very excited to bring forth 4 more presentations from 4 more research projects. Very excited to have you all on with us. And so we are going to begin with our colleagues, Dr. Christopher Pena and Dr. Jason Simon, who are partners of ours. And they actually do a lot of work. You've probably seen Christopher on a lot of webinars if you've attended any of our stuff before. He's our data literacy partner, and he also supervises our student interns. And so a lot of the work on the website has Christopher's touch to it. And Jason has joined us this year. He helped coordinate this whole process of the research grants, in addition to our Next Generation PSEO Champions program, and the 2 of them together lead our research community, which thanks Cheyenne for shouting that out, because our research community is a great opportunity as well, and we did include a link in the chat related to that. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over first to Christopher and Jason to present. You all, once again, we're going to put the 10-minute timer on, and you will be played out to some lovely music if you reach the 10-minute mark. And then we will again have 3 other presentations, and please put questions in the chat as we go. So over to you, Jason and Christopher.
Thank you so much, Gina, for that introduction. And I'm Jason Simon. As Gina mentioned, I'm really honored to be the research partner and looking forward to getting to spend a few minutes with you. But before we jump into the presentation, I want to give Christopher a chance to introduce himself.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Gina, for that introduction. As she mentioned, I work with the PSEO Coalition to help expand data literacy among the coalition members through webinars and other materials that we produce, and also working with our student intern team to put together some visualizations that you may have seen on our website.
Perfect. And we're here to talk to you today about artists and musicians 10 years out. And for Christopher and I, mostly me, Christopher was happy to go along this journey for me. I had came previously from an institution where arts majors was kind of a big deal. And there was a lot of conversation about the value of the performing arts and visual arts. And so wanted to dig in a little deeper into that. And so I'm going to start off real briefly with a rather dystopian and upsetting view to hopefully set some context for us here. But I'd like you to think a little bit about what society might look like without any graduates in the zip code 50 of arts and performing musical talents. And so we kind of set the stage this way because we want the data to tell more of a story beyond just a single value or metric. And imagining a world where there is no music as you're driving to work, or there's no visual menus when you go into a restaurant, there's no jingles or logos, there's no concerts, there's no outdoor music fairs, really set the stage for us to think critically about the value of the PSEO data and what it might be able to tell us about these students. So why this study? Well, current conversations regarding the visual and performance graduates in CIP 50 pretty much have focused solely on one-year earnings. A lot of the literature and the data that exists out there is based off of self-reported alumni studies, and a lot of it focuses just on 1 year out. But we also know that, as some of our previous presenters have mentioned, higher ed is in this place now where we're evaluating all of our programs, and we wanted to look at what the impact might be for these students within the PSEO data on program decisions regarding whether or not they should be offered and who offers them and whether or not that ROI is there or not. So our question really regarding it was, what happens to these students at 1 year, 5 year, and 10 year out? And I'm here to talk more about the practical implications of our work. Christopher is going to share with you more of the methodological, the IR, if you will, perspective on the work. But hopefully taken together, our goal is to have a deeper understanding about these students. And we know that these students follow non-traditional pathways that are not easily quantifiable in the data. And the PSEO data provides us with a framework and a lens by which to look at long-term trajectories. So specifically with these students. And what we knew versus what we didn't. Well, what the literature confirmed is that these most of the data is really focused on 1 year, as I mentioned. But the real hidden challenge here is these grads rely on portfolio careers. And what that is meant by is these are gig economy kind of students. They're doing things on the side. They may be selling their artwork on the weekends. They may be doing performances, one-offs at local establishments where music is played. And so, because of that portfolio career nature of the work, the ROI is very complex then for us to understand. And so, what we didn't know then is what we had already talked about is what do those long-term earning growth and rates look like? Christopher?
Thanks, Jason. Really, one of our main goals with this project was to show what's possible with the data, as we've heard from our presenters today with other projects. So I'll just touch briefly on some of our more interesting findings, and then I'll talk a little bit about some of the methodological considerations that may apply to some of the work that you all are doing in your own offices and shops. So we start with the PSEO earnings data set. We're focused on earnings for this study, not the flows data, which, as mentioned earlier, can be quite unwieldy in terms of its size. But this was a lot of data for us to work with on its own. As Jason mentioned, we're focusing specifically on visual and performing arts students, which fit nicely under zip code 50. Although, as I'll mention in just a minute, there are subfields within that we should take into consideration. We're looking specifically at bachelor's students and at 1, 5, and 10 years with a focus on those long-term outcomes. And by narrowing the data down to that population for study, we ended up with about 500 institutions that met our inclusion criteria for analysis. One of the biggest things to know about the data themselves is that because we wanted to look at this at a national level, we needed to create a custom aggregation based on the institution level information. So we used a weighted average of the median. We did focus on the median earnings for this project, which gave us that national lens to do some comparisons with. Next slide, please. What you see here is one of the many visualizations that we put together to help us understand what was happening with our students. This is showing the absolute earnings trajectory for those visual and performing arts students compared against all other students in other majors. We separated them out because, of course, you don't want to include the subgroup in the larger group that it's drawn from by making those comparisons. And what we found, not surprisingly, was the absolute earnings for our visual and performing arts students were lower at all three horizon points for our students. But that gap started to widen a little bit at the 10-year point. So it got a little bit bigger between those two groups of students. What's really interesting, I think, here is that this is one side of the story, looking at the earnings data on their own. When you actually look at the growth trajectory, the percent growth from 1 to 5 and 1 to 10 years, you see a slightly different story. Although the absolute earnings for visual and performing arts students are lower, the growth trajectory is actually higher at the 10-year point. So 1 to 10 years was about 80% for visual and performing arts students compared to about 72% for other major students. So that's a really nice part of the story to tell, both in terms of outcomes for visual and performing arts students, but also that these two metrics side by side can give us a more holistic picture about what's happening with our students. Next slide, please. So thinking about the methodology, I think many of us in the second part of the presentation are really thinking critically about how we study the data. There are a few things that I just wanted to point out that I think are relevant for this conversation today. First off, as I mentioned, we're using a custom aggregation, so you probably want to think about the size of students and institutions that are reflected in the data. So we used that weighted average of the medians to get there. We also looked at the cohort composition, both all cohorts together, and also the most recent cohort for which we have sufficient data to do the analysis, which was our 2010 starting cohort. And comparing them against each other, the findings were very similar, so I felt very comfortable using the all cohorts for this study. We also need to remember, of course, that there are data that are simply not available for one reason or the other, and of course for cell suppression in the underlying original data set. So that can affect what we have to work with. And then finally, thinking about the distribution of who's included in what group. Under zip code 50, visual and performing arts, the highest percentage or plurality really was the design and applied arts subgroup, and then followed by music and other studio and performance-based fields. The other majors group was predominantly business students, followed by healthcare. So we have to keep that in mind as we're interpreting all of our results together. All right, I'll turn it back to Jason to wrap us up.
Thanks. And obviously, Christopher, my message to you is that, IR and researchers in general really need to be careful and help others understand the appropriateness of their work when focusing on zip code 50 students in particular, because of the forms of dollars that are just not yet present in our PSEO data because they're earning it outside of normal parameters. So we recognize that these findings should matter to the institution. And I want to share that this one screen is not going to do justice to the rather large section in our research paper where we break down the practical implications of our work and provide specific institutional stakeholder groups with suggested advice. And so in our paper, we do talk about students and families. We do talk about guidance for boards of trustees and how to help educate them on making curriculum evaluation decisions using data like this. We do talk about the role of provosts, and we talk about the role of deans. And so we would encourage you to dig a little bit further into our paper for more of those practical applications. These findings are important because as you are presenting data on these types of graduates, it's important that you share with those around you the portfolio career nature of these students. Second, we also don't want to just rely on a single ROI metric to determine the worth of an entire field of study when we know that arts and performing students have an intrinsic value to a creative economy and a creative society. And there's clearly also a connection between these majors and economic development within local communities. Many communities will rely on the culture and the arts to sell businesses and families to relocate to new areas. And so imagining a world where these students don't exist or these graduates don't exist is somewhat challenging. We are also hopeful that this study will guide and help reframe some academic program review processes that maybe might only want to look at one single metric to determine ROI. And lastly, we believe there's lots to unpack here on policy and ROI decisions. Ultimately, and I think Christopher did a good job of framing this, the same data does support two very different conclusions based on what you're looking at, but we don't think it should be reduced to a single earnings measure. And ultimately, the question that we pose is, we don't think that these graduates is not really, we shouldn't be looking at just whether or not they earn less. The question is really whether a single earnings metric is really sufficient enough to judge the value of an entire academic program within zip code 50. And our findings would, at this point, suggest that the answer would be no. And with that, we'd like to say thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Christopher and Jason. I love when you all started talking about this as a topic. It was super interesting to think about using PSEO data, big picture, to think about, the kind of conversations that we're having at the policy level and thinking about what are the right tools, what are the right data points. From the beginning with this collaboration with Census, we've always talked about how fantastic these data are and the yes and aspect of these data. This is one set of data. It's very rich for earnings, for industry flows, for geography flows. We also recognize that there's other information, other data that could really help us see a bigger picture. And so advocating for that and potential for PSEO itself to have some data added to it in the future if that works out, that would shine a bigger light and a broader light on some of this information. So thank you both so much. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the University of North Carolina system. Very excited for you all to share your presentation. And as we said, keep the questions and keep the chat going in the chat.
Hi, thank you. My name is Gianna Malak. Until very recently, I was the Director of Academic Planning and Analysis at the UNC System Office and completed the project for the work while employed there, but this is my current directory information. I'm going to go over my project goals and deliverables, and then touch on some next steps. Just a quick overview, the UNC system is comprised of all public four-year universities in North Carolina and the North Carolina School of Science and Math, a public residential high school with 2 campuses. We have a separate North Carolina Community College system for all the public 2-year universities. North Carolina, specifically the UNC system, joined PSEO very recently with data becoming available publicly in early calendar year 2026.
With that in mind, the goal of my grant was to do a deep dive into a new to us data source with the intention to integrate PSEO data into current review metrics, specifically developing some documentation and guides for further use and some key insights from the data. Questions that we were hoping to address with PSEO data are, do graduates earn more? How do wage earners compare? Do graduates stay in North Carolina? And how's the percentage changed over time? And what's the student's return on investment? These are the listed deliverables with the reporting and visualizations being integrated over time. We started with a executive summary, a 2-pager document that provides a high-level summary of what PSEO is, some key data points of interest for the UNC board and leadership, and a recommendation to include PSEO data in efforts like our academic program planning. Workforce alignment and post-completion success have been a particular focus for us recently, and it's important for our leadership that we are serving the needs of North Carolina. So these 3 summary points are particularly helpful to highlight for this audience. At a high level, the best practices and limitation guide is a great beginner's guide or a guide for infrequent users who are interested in incorporating data in their own projects, focusing on the aggregated data files that can be downloaded from the PSEO website, though it may also be helpful for folks who are using the PSEO Explorer dashboard as well. For example, there are notes about how data are organized, like cohort groups, then some explanation of why or data availability as well as usage. For example, that due to the cohort grouping, we're limited in being able to complete trend analysis. The use case framework is usable for systems as well as individual institutions focusing on academic program planning and review. The document starts with some background regarding the UNC systems metrics for system-wide program review and ends with the application of results. Similar to a process for program review. The UNC system completes a biennial review and report. I gave a presentation at AIR Forum last year, speaking about our efforts that overhauled our methodology, focusing on 3 major themes for data and metric evaluation, that they are student-focused, that it follows a universal framework, and that it be data-driven, and touching on 5 integral concepts: demand, need, earnings, relevance to North Carolina, and whether it's a good value. The 2025 report flagged some programs which resulted in some curricular improvements, some job placement initiatives, and some program consolidations or discontinuations. The framework in the document outlines step-by-step review and provides some additional guidance on the purpose the data serve. For example, the first step starts with filtering on the PSEO aggregation level 26 for all cohorts collectively, or 32 for cohort groups, which provides summary data for all students across the state and provides a benchmark metric for evaluating against individual disciplines or institutions later. Similar to the framework, the document also outlines specific metrics to review for each of the aforementioned data groups from the framework. Again, for example, the first metric is the employment rate, defined as wage earners as a percentage of completers in the cohort group at 1 year post-completion, calculated nationally with the PSEO data, then compared against the employment rate within North Carolina, which can be obtained through a combination of the 2 PSEO data sets or the NC Department of Commerce via NC Tower product that makes publicly available. And then in-group comparisons, for example, looking at the framework group number 2, aggregation across the state at the 2-digit SIP level and degree level, how does the employment rate for, say, business and management SIP 52 compare to communication and journalism SIP 09? The last point is then to add the percentage of the completers in the cohort who are enrolled, which may overlap with the employed population, but helps narrow down the percentage of completers with truly unemployed or unknown status, which includes self-employed, certain federal employees, those employed internationally. At the bottom of the screen is a screenshot of that NC Tower outcomes tool showing the employment rate in North Carolina by cohort year and years post-completion, which is also downloadable as a table. While I had an internal working document going through every metric outlined in the framework, The applied research brief has an overview of the entire effort and expands on some of the key findings mentioned in the executive summary without all of the behind the scenes numbers. So 20% more degree completers over the last 20 years. The employment rate increased, both comparing cohort groups at the same post-completion point in time and within cohort groups reviewing later post-completion points of time. In aggregate, the bachelor completers had the lowest and doctoral professionals had the highest employment rates. Within program disciplines, the lowest employment rates are typically philosophy and religious studies at the baccalaureate and master's levels and history at the doctoral research scholarship level. The highest employment rates are computer and info sciences, education and engineering at all applicable levels. Health professions and business management also frequently had high employment rates. In aggregate, the higher credential completers earn more than lower credential completers, and this result was more apparent when comparing within program disciplines. The median wage at 1 year post-completion in the most recent cohort was around $45,000 for baccalaureate earners, $62,000 for master's earners, $86,000 for doctoral research, and $76,000 for doctoral professional practice earners. System-wide, the vast majority of UNC system wage earning degree completers work in the South Atlantic Division, and a majority of those wage earners work in North Carolina. Baccalaureate completers have the highest rates, above 80%, while doctoral research scholarship completers have the lowest rates, about 60% in aggregate. The screenshot from the PSEO Explorer illustrates all UNC system baccalaureate programs, all cohorts, 1 year post-completion geography breakouts, with 77% in-state and an additional 10% in the South Atlantic Division outside of North Carolina. There is some variation by discipline and degree level, but education at all degree levels consistently reports above 90% in the South Atlantic and within North Carolina. Computer and info sciences for us consistently reports the lowest in-state rate, with the majority of non-in-region employment in the Pacific Division. So what's next? First on my list is knowledge sharing. UNC system is obviously new to PSEO. Our stakeholders may have never heard of PSEO, or maybe they've heard us talk about it, but don't know how or why to use it. So talking about PSEO with our affinity groups, not just the results of my analysis, but what questions we can answer and how to incorporate in efforts moving forward, particularly getting into the institution-specific analysis, which I hadn't focused on for this initial effort. Thinking about how people digest information, if there are visual ways to tell the story or show the data without always being in a table format. We have internal cost data and a formula for calculating ROI using North Carolina wages. Next steps would be to plug in the PSEO median wages into that formula. There are some additional considerations around inflation factors, cohorts, and calculating at a discipline-specific level that is informative for the type of reporting needed that would need to be a part of that effort and review. An example of PSEO usage is already mentioned in the request for planning authorization form, and we could extend the usage to other required data points in this or other templates. Again, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shanna. This is great. This is very fun to see such a new system to PSEO using the data immediately. I know UNC system was very excited to get their data, possibly because they had all these ideas right at the ready. So it's very exciting to see that. And for anyone on this this showcase who maybe you don't have your data yet, or maybe it's coming in August, I think this is a really good inspiration for that, to be thinking about ways to think about using it immediately. And thanks for highlighting the work it takes to help folks understand what PSEO is. And so we've been sharing links all along, but just another highlight too. The great links that the census has. A lot of their links are very good for like nerdy folks like those of us who really want to know the documentation, which I love, love, love. because they created those and we can point folks to those. Because they've done that already, we as the coalition have tried to have a lot of our materials a little more on the, okay, you're talking to a provost about what this is. And so we do have some resources there. So really appreciate highlighting that, Gianna. All right, now we're going to turn it over to our colleagues at Scholarship America.
Hello there, welcome. So our study was on COVID and early career. Early career look for market outcomes for post-secondary graduates specific from Texas. And so I am Joe Green, and I am joined by Aaron Tejas today. And so why this study matters, we actually really wanted to go back and look at what happened in the labor market. As an education economist, I always am fascinated by shocks. And so COVID-19 obviously created a shock. So how this COVID-19 permanently changed early career outcomes and what happened during the shock and after the shock. So we're going to look at earnings, employment stability, industry placement, field of study, and geographical mobility. How many people left, stayed in the area that they were in. Our research questions are very much, how did COVID affect graduate earnings? Did graduates experience different employment pathways? Did COVID-19 change graduate mobility in their geographical area? And did the effects differ by the degree level? How we leverage the PSEO data is we used the PSEO Coalition surveys. We looked at that. The unemployment insurance records, specifically in Texas, were incredible, and the actual employment outcomes. We looked across Texas. There was fruitful data there from 2018 to 2024. We were able to see pre-COVID, post-COVID-19, and the recovery. All of the data was in there, and then the actual coalition, the PSEO coalition data allowed us to compare these three labor market periods, before, during, and after, and observe real employment outcomes, not just the survey responses. And then we were able to kind of take this and go a little bit deeper to understand and estimate the causal impact to the labor market. The PSEO, you heard this earlier, they have the mission and the vision are very much aligned around sustainability and using the data to demonstrate how higher education can positively impact a person's life. Aaron.
I believe this is still you, Joe. One more.
Oh, sure. So the study design. So we measured the timing of the labor market through our study design. We used the timeline of pre, during, and post, as I talked about earlier. So we used 18 and 19 for pre-COVID, 20 and 21 was our shock or our disruption, and then 22 to 24, we looked at recovery. What we ended up going deeper on was the outcomes. We looked at earnings, employment, industry, and geographical mobility. We controlled for the cohorts, we controlled the degree levels in which they earned, the field of study that they were looking at, and the institution type. So we used a model that kind of floated these in and out, these controlled variables. And then we actually used our analysis that we used was regression models around the degree in the field, and we went deeper around field of study with fixed effects over the time period.
Okay, now I'll jump. Thanks, Joe. We did have quite a few findings. We did want to highlight 4 of them for you today. So Joe, for the first one, if you could go to the next slide, I just want to give people a visual with a bar graph here. So what we see here is that graduates did have an earnings penalty when they entered the labor market during COVID. So as you can see in the bar graph, graduates entering the labor market during COVID earned 2.2% less 1 year after graduation than their counterparts did who entered before COVID. 1 year after graduation, as you can see in the middle bar in the green or the blue color, 1 year after graduation, the recovery graduates' earnings also dropped by 5.8% when compared to those students who entered the labor market during COVID. I think that the saving grace for all of us here, and we were encouraged by this number, the last number, which is 5 years after COVID, we did see those percentage rates start to increase again. So we are cautiously optimistic that the differences will largely start to disappear and there is resilience in the economy. So Joe, if you could go back to the first slide, thank you. The second one is employment stability. So employment rates had gone down, which indicated to us that employment stability had also decreased during this period. So graduates who entered the job market, did have weaker employment during the disruption period. The third area we wanted to highlight today is career alignment. So field of study or an academic major that a student has chosen to get their degree in, there is a mismatch between the field of study and the actual jobs that they enter during COVID. There was an increase in that percentage that we saw students have a mismatch in job opportunities. And the last one, which was interesting, was geographic mobility. So interstate mobility drastically declined during the pandemic. And it was not just for career alignment or for job placement, it also was internships, right? So we saw a longer term impact from not being able to be mobile geographically throughout school, as we've seen very normal in higher education. So the key takeaway here is that COVID-19 really affected more than just earnings. It really changed how graduates entered the workforce, whether that was through employment stability, also through money, but most importantly, their career alignment to their academic love, most likely, right? And then their ability to be mobile once they graduate from college. So why in the world does this all matter? It's a lot, right? We saw that too. So in our research paper, we did have an implications section. I'm sorry, a separate report that was for implications, specifically for those who practice in this field. So for higher education, particularly presidents and provosts and higher education leaders, we really wanted to highlight that graduate earnings are not just about the money. There is economic shock that impacts what graduates can earn. So it's not just the dollar amount that matters the most, it's the context under which they're entering the workforce. And so we really wanted higher ed leaders to take employment, career alignment, and mobility into really serious consideration when they're looking at increasing program and career services for students. For policymakers, there are performance metrics that we would really love to have recognized that there are major economic disruptions that can temporarily impact graduates' career outcomes without necessarily reflecting the higher education effectiveness or educational equity that those institutions provide for students. It's much more contextually large than that for us. For students, dear students, just because you graduated during COVID and didn't make as much does not mean that's where you will stay. That's what our data told us. And so we really wanted to communicate that to students and to learners as they continue to move forward in their educational goals. And for researchers, the PSEO Coalition really enabled this longitudinal analysis that Joe and I have together that really looks at earnings and employment and field of study and mobility to create new opportunities that pulls multiple data sets together. So we aren't looking at just one singular variable when we're looking at the effectiveness of graduation.
So the key takeaway is Erin kind of talked about graduate success should be evaluated through both the institutional performance of economic conditions in which they face the workplace and shortly thereafter. Our paper, we did put this up for review and we're in an R&R stage. It's with the Economics of Education Review. It's an A journal. So basically we were super excited. We submitted this shortly afterwards. It's in preprint now. We're working through a couple of revisions. You should probably likely see this one in very beginning of 27 in print. And our future plans for this work is really around foundation, broader research. We want to expand the research, going deeper and understand regional impacts to labor markets. Extending the time horizon, go beyond kind of essentially our fixed study here to about 10 years or beyond, and deeper our equity analyses, kind of going a little bit different in the demographics and majors and different implications, and then inform policy with Department of Ed and other organizations and predict future outcomes. So really developing labor market models that forecast graduate outcomes in future economic conditions. Again, our short-term takeaway is COVID reduced short-term earnings, but they were able to kind of recover some of those. We've long heard people say what you enter with is kind of what you're stuck with for a lifetime. That kind of pivoted and we didn't see that study supported. the employment became less stable, field of study mismatch, geographical mobility declined. That's actually a big area for a lot of states. They say we fund education institutions to educate students to stay within a certain geographical area, but yet they leave. During the pandemic, they remained in the same areas. Most earnings effect diminish over time. And so this kind of allowed us to move beyond the evidence and understand economic shocks and how they reshape. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Joan. And this is really interesting stuff. And I think it highlights too, sometimes as researchers, we get frustrated by having to wait for data. And obviously we have to wait a certain amount of time for these data because census needs to get the data from the workforce side of the house. They need to get the data from the post-secondary side of the house and match them. And, you know, sometimes with the adding of the cohorts and all of those pieces, it can seem like, oh, these data are old by the time we get them. I think yours in particular really showed how we can look at something as a point in time. And that's actually really important for us to be thinking about that and not just going, hey, every single year or every single set of years, we should be comparing this and saying, oh, you know, we should all be moving up in earnings. We should be doing this, we should be doing that. No, because things happen like a pandemic, and they very clearly impacted a lot of aspects, not just the earnings, but to your point, the geographic flow as well. And that some people might be happy about that. Like you said, Joe, some state folks might be like, great, they stayed instead of having that mobility. But for folks to know that it was a moment in time, and to also know that you saw as you looked at it over time, that it didn't mean that then we were stuck, we as a society were stuck there forever, that you did see some rebounds is really exciting information. Congratulations on the journal. Be really excited to see that published in there as well. Now we're going to move on to Arizona State University. We have a fantastic team to talk about talent stickiness, and they're going to explain to us what that is and how they use the data to analyze this.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gina, and good afternoon. And just thank you to the PSEO Coalition. I'll just dive right into our research, which is, the work of the three of us out of Arizona State University's Mary Lou Fulton College. So it's John, myself, and Margarita. And our project is called Staying in the Sunshine. And as was mentioned, we set out to develop a talent stickiness index, with TSI really being the percentage of employed graduates from Arizona's public universities who work in Arizona during a defined post-graduation period. So let me just navigate. So I'll just start with the purpose and why a talent stickiness index really matters for a state. And it's because a state's workforce strategy really depends, right, not only on degree production, but on graduate retention by institution, by industry, and by time horizon. You can see here the stakes within Arizona, right? We have one of the fastest state job growth trajectories in the country, data that we pulled from the Office of Economic Opportunity here in Arizona. But something that I think is really important to call out is that those projections, right, they're a ceiling. They are not a promise. And whether Arizona actually captures that growth depends largely on whether the graduates our public universities produce stay in state and if they stay in the industries that are doing the hiring, right? A booming forecast, right, is only going to pay off for Arizonans if the talent we educate is really still here to fill those jobs, which aligns with our three research questions. So the research questions were, how well do Arizona's public higher education institutions and ultimately the state retain graduates in the state where they earned their degree right after graduation and over time compared to public universities in other states, which we'll demo in the dashboard later on. Does that retention rate, what we're calling talent stickiness index, differ across the three institutions? The three institutions being Arizona State University, Northern Arizona University, and the University of Arizona. And then finally, the last question was, how does stickiness differ across industries? So that's really the why. And now I'm just going to show you the how. So how we actually built the index. So the core of the whole project is really one simple ratio. The TSI, or Talent Stickiness Index, is the share of a university's employed graduates who are working in state at any given point in time. So the count employed in Arizona divided by the count employed anywhere. And we compute that across 3 horizons, so 1, 5, and 10 years after graduation. Additionally, we disaggregate it by institution, by degree level, graduation cohort, employer industry, and then employer geography. And our sample was specifically bachelor's degrees graduates from our 3 public universities in Arizona from 2004 to 2019. And within our report, you can see that we supplement PSEO with the Arizona's Office of Economic Opportunities, their industry projections, so that we could really like set retention against projected labor market demand. And just wanted to flag here too, like this analysis is descriptive, it's not causal. So the TSCI documents where graduates now work, but it does not, by itself explain why they stay or why they leave. So based on that, I'm going to share 2 of our biggest findings. So the first finding was that the first 5 years are really a critical window for retention. So statewide within Arizona, aggregate retention falls roughly from 70% at year 1 to 61% at year 5, and then to 58% at year 10. So Arizona's keeping most of its graduates right after graduation, right? But it's losing a share over the median term. The decline, as you all can see, right, between year 1 and year 5 is really 2 to 3 times steeper than the decline between year 5 and year 10. And so that single fact identifies that the first 5 years post-graduation is really this critical retention window for the state and for institutional interventions. Graduates, right, as we're seeing, who are still here at year 5 are tending really to stay for the long haul. So this is just, when we lose graduates. And then the second finding here is where we are losing them. And the finding, which was that there's this retention demand mismatch here in Arizona. So if I were a workforce planner, which I'm not, but I worry about so many things for myself and for others. So if I was a workforce planner, here's what I would be worried about. That Arizona's stickiest industries are not the industries where the state needs the most workers. So if you look over here on the left, what we're seeing is that our strongest retention is concentrated where demand is the weakest. So utilities and education, we see that retention is really holding quite nicely here in Arizona. But when we looked at the Office of Economic Opportunities projections, we saw that over the next 10 years, essentially those 2 industries are effectively flat. Information, there's projected 18 jobs within the state over the next decade. So on the other side, we see that the industries that need the most workers are those that are leaking talent. So healthcare and social assistance is our state's single largest projected source of new jobs. So, a little over 110,000 over the next decade. And we're seeing, though, that retention is sliding right from those mid to high 70s at year 1 into the mid 50s to mid 60s by year 10. I'm just going to point out here the single most dramatic number that we saw, which was in food and hospitality. Which was showing this was our steepest decline in the entire panel that we did. And so University of Arizona's food and hospitality graduates fall from 64.7% at year 1 to 33.5% at year 10. So that was the single largest industry decline that we observed. And just to put it into context, this is a sector that's contributing 24.2 billion to our state's GDP, and it's 11% of our current workforce. So the final thing here, and you can dive into the report, is that when graduates are leaving, the dominant destination is the Pacific region as well. So just, to reiterate, our strongest retention sits where demand is weakest, and our weakest retention really sits where demand is strongest. Which brings me to what a state might actually do with an index like this. I'm going to move forward here pretty quickly because I just looked at the timer. But really thinking about where we could target our scarce dollars. So we know that the year 1 to 5 window is super critical. So how can we be, thinking about interventions with employer partnerships and loan repayment programs, and early career pathways that could really concentrate efforts on those first 5 years, really thinking about benchmarking institutions fairly. The enrollment composition of our institutions do matter, and I think that's something that really needs that our states, alongside additional data sets, could be diving into to better share the story of talent stickiness, aligning our higher education with workforce plans, and then just being able to compare across states too, right? This method is identical in Arizona, it's identical in Texas and Colorado. And so we can really tell where a retention gap is an Arizona problem versus maybe a broader regional one. And so I think that context really changes how states might respond. Just a few considerations, right? This is, covered employment only, and, self-employment and independent contractors, right? We might see that retention may be understated in fields with high self-employment, and then to go back to origin matters, so where graduates come from, in-state, out-of-state, that really shapes how likely they are to stay. And then just kind of our next steps for our work, and I'll just highlight one. We really want to add in the PSEO earnings flow. And I feel like I don't even need to explain why we want to add in the PSEO earnings flow. And I'll just really quickly hop over to our dashboard, which is at talentstickiness.org. I'll just screen share it really quickly. And John, I don't know if you want to go through in the next, 20 seconds what's on here and how people might use it.
No, we can be respectful of people's times and handle it in the questions, but I dropped it in the chat if you guys want to look at it and play around, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you so much. And yeah, we'll just leave it with that. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you. That was amazing. And while everyone's projects were probably equally complex, we did, I think, give the ASU team a little bit more challenge because you had a lot. I know you had a dashboard, a stickiness dashboard, a report, findings. So thank you for condensing that great information all down to 10 minutes. Based on the chat I've been watching, either questions got answered by one of the other presenters, which is amazing, or a lot of the stuff was in the chat, which is exactly what we hoped for, is that people were having conversations with each other and sharing ideas, which I love. And so more of that, all of that, I'm going to raise that up. What I'd like to do at this point is I am going to pose a question like I did the first half, that I'd like each team to answer. And again, feel free, multiple people from the teams can answer. And then because I know as we get closer to the hour, some people have meetings on the hour. So I'm also going to share my screen, which has a QR code to a very brief survey. So for folks, as you have to sneak off to another meeting, I want to give you a chance to answer that because we would really love your feedback. But I'm not putting that up because we're done. I'm putting that up so that you have time to fill that out while I ask the question. And so if you don't mind, just to make it easier for everybody, I'm going to do the same logistics I did last time. So we'll start with Christopher and Jason. This time my question is a little bit more, I don't know, not silly, but sort of on the fun side of things, which is this is people ask, what's your favorite pet or your favorite national park? I hope they don't ask what your favorite kid is because that's inappropriate. But but some of your kids might ask you that. But I would like to ask you, what's your favorite just aspect of PSEO? So if you were telling someone about PSEO the first time, you could say it's got a lot of stuff, but my favorite thing, my favorite characteristic of PSEO is this. Jason's already off mute, so I was going to say Jason, then Christopher, and then we'll go to Gianna and kind of move our way through the presenters.
I would say that for an educated individual, it allows us to really tackle the ROI question head on. And it provides policymakers and higher education leadership with a fact-based narrative that, in my opinion, is sorely lacking in a lot of conversations. And I'm so grateful for the work of the PSEO team at the census because they're enabling us to have these rich conversations like we all shared with you today. And I'm so dang proud. I know Gina, you didn't ask this, but I'm just so dang proud of all the grantees for the work that they did because it is amazing to me to see a tool like the PSEO and all of the different ways that data can be interpreted and have an impact. And so it ties back to my original statement. I love the fact that we're able to start to have some counter narratives to some of the non-fact based concerns about higher education. So that'd be my answer. Christopher?
I would definitely echo the ROI component. As we all know, higher education is being challenged these days. And so being able to tell this story in a way that's constructive and really aligns with what we hope is the mission of education, I think is very powerful. I would just add, as Gina mentioned earlier, I work with our student interns for the coalition who have built some different tools and helped us to really think through what's possible with the data. They are genuinely excited about this tool, and their friends are as well when they show it to them. The feedback we get is it's great to use, it helps to answer questions, the explorer, the data. And that's not something you would expect just from your typical college student. Of course, they care about what happens after graduation, but to use a data-focused tool as a student is really interesting and gives me a lot of hope about what's possible with a data set like this. So definitely something to consider as a stakeholder audience. Of course, we think about policymakers and legislators and administrators, but our students can benefit from the data as well.
Christopher, I love that. And Gina, I'm going to take 10 extra seconds because I feel like it's important to say my son is graduating this year and literally is in current negotiations with his first employer. And the PSEO is enabling him to have a much richer negotiation for his first year salary based on actual data. And I feel like if we can do that, I just wish everyone in the country had that same opportunity and exposure that my son just has.
That's really cool that your favorite kid has that opportunity. I'm kidding. Your daughter is not going to see this. That's recurring. I just had to do that callback since I mentioned favorite kid. Gianna, what's your favorite? You had a lot of activity in with the data, so it's hard to pick a favorite, I know, but
Yeah, well, so for me personally, a lot of what we do, it's as a public university, it's very important to have data sources that are publicly available, and that are transparent in terms of where the data are coming from and any data aggregation or I hate to use the word manipulation, but anything that's happening to the data, like being very transparent about where it's coming from and how we got to the number that we got to. So that's very important to us. And also the geography question. So that's something that again is very important to our state. Are we are we educating? Are we paying for students uh, to get this education and then adding to the workforce within the state of North Carolina? So being able to very comfortably answer those questions about, are they staying in state, or if they're going elsewhere, where are they going? And being able to have like more complex conversations around that. So those are two things that like we've been have been in a lot of conversations the last couple of years. So this is really exciting for me to be able to have this data as a resource for those reasons.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. There are some great for purchase data out there, right? But and no shade to them, but just the fact that these are publicly available, free, massively trusted. We shared the link to the documentation. Like the census could not be more protective of privacy. And so it's great to have that and have it all at our fingertips because our government is providing this for us with our collaboration. So thank you so much for that, Jenna. Joe and Aaron, your thoughts?
So the one of the amazing things is really going across state lines. I mean, it's and the work that PSEO Coalition has done with the Census Bureau. I mean, the Census Bureau it's kind of like your grandmother's attic. There's amazing things in there, but someone's got to make use of all of that amazing stuff. And PSEO Coalition has taken that and organized it and actually taken wage and outcome data and coupled that up with institutional data like no other. And so I absolutely love the data because of that reason. Aaron, do you have things too?
Yeah, I do. Higher ed is my true love, right? So, and as a sociologist, I fully acknowledge that there are contextual pieces to higher ed that are really hard to consider, right? So, what I really love about the PSEO Coalition is that it takes all of those separate contexts that higher ed lives inside of and pulls them together. So, I know inside of higher ed, we joke a lot about the ivory tower, and when you graduate, it's the real world, right? Like we all joke about that stuff. It's kind of funny sometimes. But in reality, higher ed very much lives in the society that we operate within, right? And so that PSEO Coalition data really helped us bridge some of those contexts that we talk about so separately and melded them together. That's my favorite part.
Thank you. Yeah, I love that. It's the sophistication of all the pieces of this data set. So thanks for that. John, Margarita, Roxanne, thoughts from Arizona on what were your favorite parts of this data set, this tool?
I will start. I wanted to say that I like that it's free because very few things in life are free, as we know, and having access to that wealth of information, it's really valuable. And the way I was thinking about it, that it could be used for educational purposes, for instance, teaching classes in like higher ed programs, right? So it gives you a very quick and also real-time access to information that can inform decisions and just general thinking about higher education and issues. My other kind of favorite feature of the data set when I learned about it is that it has a balance of being really complex, but at the same time, it's relatively easy to manage. If you have a good question in mind, then you can kind of find out these pieces that will help you to address that question. And probably the third one is that it can be merged with other data sets, like iPads, Bureau of Labor Statistics. You can kind of have a retrospective data from iPads about what these institutions are, and you can have a forward-looking view from kind of employment data from industries in general, not just it. So probably these three things are my favorite things about PSEO data. And thank you so much for that opportunity.
Yeah, I can just jump in. A couple of things that I really love about this PSEO data. One is that it's longitudinal. We made a lot of use of how rich the data was along that time horizon. I think Dr. Green mentioned it's comparable across state lines. That was really useful to us, and I work a lot in K through 12 spaces. It can be very difficult to find data that can be compared from one state context to the next. So it's really amazing to be able to work with a data set where we could combine, at least descriptively, a bunch of different states. I thought that was really fantastic. And I just love how flexible it is, like the project on looking at graduates in the arts. I just, that's not something that I had really ever considered. And it's amazing that a data set like this can provide these sort of rich and very creative ways to approach different problems.
Any final thoughts, Roxanne? Your favorite?
Yeah. I'll just share that my favorite part of PSEO was just really the opportunity to combine my love for Arizona and higher education with, just meaningful data that's really telling the story of why Arizona's public universities matter. And I think, utilizing complex information to really create a clear case for investment in higher education in Arizona as well as in other states. So thank you so much.
Love it. Thank you. Just a huge thank you to everybody who honestly rewinds to everybody who applied to our grant program, because we had some phenomenal ones that unfortunately this year we weren't able to fund, although we did find some creative ways actually to provide some resources to at least one other applicant. And then the 6 congratulations who were awarded and who presented today, in addition to Christopher and Jason who presented their work as well. Thank you all. Love that there's this huge community and growing community of people who are interested in using these data. Please check PSEOcoalition.org. We've got lots and lots of resources there. If you're not on our mailing list, we do not send out, honestly, emails very often. We send them about 4 times a quarter. We do a newsletter, or excuse me, 4 quarters, 4 times a year. We do a newsletter, but if you do want to join, just go to PSEOcoalition.org, scroll to the bottom, and there's a join our newsletter. If you don't happen to be on that yet, that's where you can hear about information about things like this. Thank you all so very, very much for joining us. Wait a couple days and we will have the recording and the slides published on our website. So have a wonderful rest of all of your weeks, and thanks for joining us today.